That night, as I stepped into the hallway of our house, a place I thought I knew like the back of my hand, everything felt off. The walls, which used to whisper familiarity, now echoed something foreign, as if I'd walked into a replica of my own life with the details just slightly skewed. Caitlin's laughter drifted faintly from upstairs, mingling with the low hum of a conversation. It was 11:45 p.m. She was on the phone again and hadn't noticed me coming home early from my work trip. Then again, Caitlin hadn't noticed much about me lately. Her voice carried that sugary undertone she used when charming someone. I could feel the shift in my chest, a weight I couldn't shake. That voice wasn't meant for me anymore. Instead of going upstairs, I leaned against the kitchen counter, letting the cold granite press into my palms. I listened. "I told you, don't worry about him," she said, her tone amused. "He's clueless. And even if he weren't, what could he do about it?" A slow burn crept up my throat. Years of combat had taught me to control my emotions under pressure, so I steadied my breathing. Anger wouldn't help me now. I needed to stay sharp, focused. When she hung up, the house went quiet. Only then did I climb the stairs, my boots barely making a sound on the hardwood. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and there she was, sitting cross-legged on the bed, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. "Hey," I said, stepping inside. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide for a split second before masking her surprise with a smile. "You're back early." "Yeah, figured I'd surprise you." Her phone disappeared under the pillow so fast it might have set a record. "How was your trip?" she asked, her voice light, her movements casual. But I noticed the way her hands fidgeted and her gaze flickered toward the pillow. "It was fine," I replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "How about you? What did you get up to while I was gone?" She shrugged, pulling her knees to her chest like a teenager caught sneaking out past curfew. "Nothing much. Work. Gym. The usual." "Gym, huh?" I reached over and pulled her phone out from under the pillow before she could react. "Chris," she snapped, reaching for it, but I held it out of her grasp. "Just curious," I said, unlocking it with the passcode I'd known for years. My fingers scrolled through her messages with practiced ease. I didn't bother hiding what I was doing. Her face turned pale as I opened a thread labeled, "Work, Brian." At first, the messages seemed innocent, but as I scrolled, the tone shifted, flirty, then intimate, then explicit. "Give me that," she spat, crossing her arms. "You're being insane." "Insane?" I laughed sharply. That's not the word I'd use to describe. I can't stop thinking about our last night together. Her mask slipped for a moment, panic flashing across her face before it was replaced with fury. "You had no right to go through my phone. And you had no right to bring him into our marriage." I shot back. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Her expression hardened into something unrecognizable, and in that moment, I realized how far she drifted from the woman I thought I knew. "I'm not doing this with you," she said, grabbing her purse. "I'm staying at a hotel tonight." I didn't stop her. Instead, I watched as she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. When the silence returned, I sat down on the bed, staring at her phone in my hand. She thought this was over, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. When Caitlin left the house, slamming the front door hard enough to rattle the windows, I stayed put. I sat there on the bed, holding her phone like it was some kind of cursed artifact. I knew better than to chase after her. People like Caitlin slipped up when they thought they had the upper hand. Right now, she believed she was in control. I reopened her phone, scrolling through her messages again. If she wanted to run, fine. I'd dig into everything while she was gone. Her chat history with "Work, Brian" painted an uglier picture the deeper I went. Photos that made my stomach churn. Voice notes where she laughed about how easy it was to fool me. "You'd laugh if you saw him," one message read. "He's so serious all the time. Like, calm down, man. You're not in the army anymore." My grip on the phone tightened. I leaned back, forcing myself to breathe. I wasn't in the army anymore. No. Now I dealt with people like Caitlin for a living. Liars, manipulators, smug criminals who thought they were smarter than everyone else. She had no idea the skill set she was up against. As I scrolled, something made my blood run cold. An email, dated 3 weeks ago, hidden in a folder she must have forgotten to delete. It was from a private investigator, a PI she'd hired to dig into me. The email was short and to the point. "Hi, Caitlin. Here's everything we found so far. No major surprises, but let us know if you need more specific details. Attached are the photos and timelines for Chris's recent trips." I opened the attachment. There I was, in grainy photos outside the FBI field office, at airports, at locations tied to my undercover work. The report detailed my movements, my schedule, even my fake cover job as a security consultant. She had no idea what I really did, but she'd been snooping, trying to connect dots. Why? I filed it away in my mind. I didn't have all the pieces yet, but one thing was clear. Caitlin wasn't just cheating. She was hiding something deeper. The next 2 hours passed in a blur as I pieced together her digital footprint. Burner email accounts linked to her phone number. Fake usernames on forums and social media. One account led me to a profile on a dating app. That's where I found him, Brian. Only his real name wasn't Brian. It was Marcus, and he wasn't her coworker. A quick background check revealed Marcus owned a small marketing agency downtown, but there was nothing tying him to Caitlin's workplace. She lied about everything. By 3 a.m., I was wired. My mind raced with questions, and anger bubbled just beneath the surface. I needed answers. I needed to confront her, but not yet. Not until I had everything. And then, like fate had a cruel sense of humor, my phone buzzed. It was Caitlin. "I'm at the Alden Hotel. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. If she thought she was safe, she was wrong. I wasn't going to wait up. I was going to act. I threw on a jacket, grabbed my car keys, and slipped out the door. The Alden Hotel was a sleek, modern place on the other side of town. The kind of spot that catered to business professionals during the day and secret rendezvous at night. When I pulled into the parking lot, her car was parked near the entrance, right where I expected it to be. I stayed in my car for a moment, watching. The adrenaline buzzed in my veins, making my hands feel light on the steering wheel. A part of me wanted to storm in and confront her right then and there, but that wasn't my style. Caitlin thought she had the upper hand. She thought she was untouchable. Let her think that a little longer. After about 10 minutes, the glass doors to the lobby slid open, and there she was. Caitlin. Her hair was tied back, and she wore a dress I didn't recognize. Sleek, black, expensive. She wasn't alone. A man followed close behind, his arm brushing against hers. Marcus. They laughed as they walked toward his car, her hand casually brushing his arm like they'd done this 1,000 times before. The sight made my chest tighten, but I swallowed it down. Emotions wouldn't help me now. I waited until their car pulled out of the lot, then I followed at a distance. They didn't go far, just a few miles to a diner on the outskirts of town. A 24-hour greasy spoon I knew well from late-night stakeouts. They parked, got out, and walked inside, chatting like they were old friends. I parked a safe distance away and sat in the car for a moment, watching through the big glass windows. They slid into a booth near the back, leaning close, their heads almost touching as they spoke. Caitlin laughed at something Marcus said, her hand resting on his forearm like she couldn't help herself. The sight made my stomach churn. Pulling out my phone, I snapped a photo through the window. Evidence. I wasn't just here for closure. I was here to collect everything I needed to blow her story apart. Once I had the photo, I stepped out of the car and headed toward the diner. The bell above the door jingled as I pushed it open, the faint smell of fried food and stale coffee hitting me like a wall. A couple of heads turned, but I ignored them, my eyes locked on Caitlin and Marcus. Caitlin was the first to notice me. Her laughter died in her throat, her face going pale as her eyes widened in shock. She sat up straighter, pulling her hand back as if she'd touched a live wire. "Chris," she stammered, her voice higher pitched than usual. "What are you?" Marcus turned, his expression shifting from confusion to unease. He looked younger than me, early 30s, with a slim frame and a watch that screamed, midlife crisis. "Who's this?" Marcus asked, his tone defensive but uncertain. "Good question," I said, sliding into the booth across from them. I leaned back, arms stretched across the top of the seat, forcing a calm I didn't feel. Maybe Caitlin would like to explain. "This isn't what it looks like," Caitlin blurted, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. "Isn't it?" I tilted my head and pulled out my phone, opening the photo I'd just taken. I set it on the table in front of her. "Because it looks pretty clear to me." Her face drained of color, and Marcus, now visibly uncomfortable, started to slide out of the booth. "Look, man," he said, raising his hands. "I didn't know she was married." "Didn't know?" I shot him a cold look. "Interesting. Because the messages you sent her don't exactly scream ignorance." Caitlin's composure cracked. "What the hell, Chris? Are you following me now? Spying on me? This is insane." I turned my gaze to her, keeping my expression calm but hard. "Spying? No, Caitlin. Spying is when you hire a PI to dig into your spouse's life. You know, like you did to me." That hit its mark. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "You've been snooping into my life," I continued, lying to my face, sneaking around with him. I gestured toward Marcus, who now looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. "And you think I'm the one out of line? You don't get to play the victim here." Caitlin snapped, slamming her hands on the table. "You're gone all the time. You're distant, secretive. How am I supposed to feel when my husband's a stranger to me?" "Don't you dare turn this around on me," I said, my voice finally rising. "You have no idea what I've been dealing with. Do you want to know why I'm gone so much? Why I'm secretive? Fine, I'll tell you." I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "I'm not a consultant, Caitlin. I'm an FBI agent." The words hit like a bomb, and for the first time, Caitlin was speechless. Even Marcus looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing as he processed what I just said. "Yeah," I said, sitting back. "While you've been playing games behind my back, I've been risking my life in ways you can't even imagine. And you know why I didn't tell you? Because I trusted you. Because I thought you were my partner. My wife." Caitlin's lips parted, but all she managed was a whisper. "Chris, Save it," I said, cutting her off. "You think I'm just going to let this go? You think I'm done?" I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing between Caitlin and me like he was trying to decide whether to stay or bolt. He chose the latter. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble," he mumbled, grabbing his jacket and starting to slide out of the booth. I turned to him, my tone icy. "You didn't want trouble? Then maybe you shouldn't have gotten involved with someone else's wife." He froze, his hand on the table, before slowly sinking back into his seat. "I didn't know it was like that," he said, his voice unsteady. "She told me." "Don't," I snapped, cutting him off. "Don't sit here and lie to my face. If you're going to be a coward, at least have the decency to shut your mouth." "Chris, stop it," Caitlin said, her voice rising in anger and embarrassment. "You're making a scene." "A scene?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "A scene is sneaking around behind my back and thinking I wouldn't find out. This is called consequences." Caitlin glared at me, her cheeks flushed with anger. "You don't get to humiliate me like this." I leaned forward, lowering my voice so only the two of them could hear. "Humiliate you? Caitlin, you're sitting here with another man, laughing at my expense, and you think I'm humiliating you?" She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, I turned my attention back to Marcus. "You," I said, my tone cold, "are going to tell me everything. Now." Marcus paled, his hand twitching slightly as if he wanted to reach for something. His phone, maybe. I gave him a warning look, and he quickly folded his hands on the table. "Look, it's not what you think," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. I didn't know she was married at first, and when I found out—" "You kept going," I interrupted. "Don't pretend like you're innocent. What I want to know is what else you're involved in." Marcus blinked, caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb with me," I said, my tone sharp. "You think I don't know about your little side business? The fake marketing agency? The money laundering?" His eyes widened, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. Caitlin looked between us, her expression shifting from anger to confusion. "Chris," she said cautiously. What are you talking about? Marcus here isn't just some guy you met on a dating app, I said, keeping my eyes locked on him. He's running a front for a smuggling ring. Drugs, weapons, counterfeit goods, you name it. And now, thanks to your brilliant decision-making, you're tangled up in it too. Caitlin's face drained of color. That's not true, she said, her voice shaky. That can't be true. Oh, it's true, I said, leaning back in the booth. You really picked a winner this time, Caitlin. Marcus shifted in his seat, his panic barely hidden now. Look, I don't know what you think you know, but I'm just a businessman. Save it, I snapped. The FBI has been watching you for months. You're sloppy, Marcus. And now you've dragged her into your mess. Chris, stop. Caitlin said, her voice rising again. You're wrong. I didn't know. Didn't you? I interrupted, turning to her. Then why the burner emails? The offshore account transfers? The PI you hired to dig into me? She flinched, her eyes filling with tears. I just wanted to know what you were hiding, she whispered. You thought wrong, I said, my voice hard. You had no idea what you were getting yourself into, and now you've put both of us in danger. For a moment, the three of us sat there in tense silence, the weight of my words settling over the table. Finally, Marcus broke the quiet. I swear, I didn't mean for this to happen, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I was just trying to survive. Survive? I repeated, my tone sharp. That's your excuse? You expect me to believe you're some victim in all of this? You don't understand, Marcus said, his voice trembling. The people I'm dealing with, they don't give second chances. If I don't do what they want, they'll kill me. And you dragged her into this? I said, gesturing toward Caitlin. You thought that was a good idea? Marcus didn't answer, his head dropping in defeat. Caitlin stared at him, her expression a mix of anger and betrayal. I didn't sign up for this, she said quietly. I didn't know. No, I cut her off, my voice firm. You didn't think. And now, you've made yourself a target. I stood up, tossing a few bills onto the table to cover whatever they'd ordered. This ends now. Both of you are going to tell me everything. Every lie, every detail, every single thing you've done to get us into this mess. Chris, wait, Caitlin said, her voice desperate. You can't. I'm done waiting, Caitlin, I said, my tone cold. You wanted to play games? Fine. But now, I'm playing by my rules. I turned and walked out of the diner, leaving them sitting there in stunned silence. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, but I barely felt it. My mind was already spinning, piecing together the next steps. If Caitlin and Marcus thought this was over, they were wrong. I wasn't just going to clean up their mess. I was going to bring the whole thing crashing down. The drive home was silent, save for the faint hum of the engine. My thoughts spun in a chaotic storm, replaying every word, every look, and every lie. Caitlin wasn't just reckless. She'd crossed into dangerous territory, and now she was dragging me down with her. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked the same as always, a dark, quiet shell of what it once was. But it wasn't my home anymore. Not really. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. The stillness felt oppressive, the silence almost mocking. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sit still. Instead, I moved to the office, powered up my laptop, and started digging deeper. If Caitlin wasn't going to tell me the full story, I'd find it myself. Her laptop was still on the desk, and I cracked it open. Her predictable habits worked against her again. The same password I'd known for years unlocked it. A mix of emotions churned in my chest as I navigated through her files. Anger, sadness, and the gnawing feeling of betrayal. Her email inbox was clean, suspiciously so, but she wasn't as careful with her drafts. One message stood out, unsent, addressed to Marcus. Subject: Plan update Marcus, Chris is suspicious. He knows about us. I'm handling it, but we need to move faster. If he digs too deep, this is going to get messy. I read it twice, the words burning into my brain. Messy? What exactly did she mean by that? Was this more than just her trying to cover up an affair? I kept digging. Her files were mostly mundane. Photos, work documents, some receipts. But then I found it. a folder buried deep in the system, labeled innocuously as receipts. Inside were encrypted files. She wasn't this tech-savvy, which meant Marcus or someone else must have set this up for her. I copied the folder onto an external drive and sent it to Richards with a quick message. Decrypt this. Priority 1. An hour passed. Then 2. The house remained silent, and I sat in the dark, staring at my phone, waiting for Richards to call. Finally, the screen lit up. What's in the folder? I asked without preamble. Richards sighed on the other end. Mike, you're not going to like this. Just tell me. She's been moving money, he said. Regular transfers to an offshore account. Not huge amounts, but consistent. Small enough to stay under the radar. I felt the blood drain from my face. And the account's linked to a shell company, Richards continued, his voice grim. One we've flagged before. It's tied to a smuggling network out of Eastern Europe. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking, everything. My stomach churned. You're saying Caitlin is laundering money for them? I'm saying she's involved, whether she realizes the full extent or not. This isn't just about an affair, Mike. This is bigger. I clenched my jaw, my mind racing. Anything else? One more thing, Richard said, hesitating. Her name came up in some intercepted communications. They've been watching you, Mike. They know who you are. I froze. What? They were using her to get to you, he said quietly. Whether she agreed to it willingly or was coerced, I can't say. But these people don't make idle threats. If they know you're onto them, you're both in danger. I ended the call without another word, my hand tightening around the phone. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and the picture they formed was worse than I'd imagined. Caitlin wasn't just betraying me. She put both of us in the crosshairs of a dangerous organization. By the time the sun rose, I had a plan. Caitlin wasn't back yet, which told me all I needed to know about where her priorities lay. I showered, dressed, and headed out the door. If she wouldn't talk to me, I'd force the truth out of her the only way I knew how, by confronting her where she thought she was safe. It didn't take long to track her location. Her phone pinged at an apartment complex across town, a far cry from the Alden Hotel she'd mentioned in her text. I parked a block away and approached on foot, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and anticipation. Her car was in the lot, parked outside a ground floor unit. I stood in the shadows for a moment, watching through the window. She wasn't alone. Marcus was there, pacing while she sat on the couch, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. They were arguing, their gestures sharp and agitated. I didn't wait for an invitation. I walked up to the door and knocked hard. The arguing stopped. A moment later, Caitlin opened the door, her face pale as she registered who was standing there. "Chris," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you?" "Move," I said, stepping past her into the apartment. Marcus froze mid-step, his face contorting with a mix of fear and defiance. "What the hell is this?" he asked, his voice unsteady. "You know exactly what this is," I said, my tone cold. "Sit down." "I don't." "Sit down." My voice was sharp enough to cut glass, and he obeyed, sinking into a chair near the window. "Chris, you can't just—" Caitlin started, but I turned to her, cutting her off with a glare. "Save it," I said. "I've heard enough lies. Now, you're both going to tell me the truth. Everything. Right now." Caitlin froze, her arms wrapped defensively across her chest. Her lips pressed together in a tight line, and for a moment, I thought she might try to argue. But something in my expression must have told her I wasn't in the mood for games. Marcus, on the other hand, wasn't as composed. He shifted nervously in his seat, his eyes darting toward the door like he was weighing his chances of escape. "Don't even think about it," I said sharply, my tone cold as steel. "You so much as twitch, and I'll have you in cuffs before you make it 2 steps. "Chris, stop," Caitlin said, her voice trembling. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "Am I?" I snapped, turning to her. "You think hiring a PI to dig into my life, laundering money, and cozying up to a smuggler is no big deal? What exactly is the right proportion, Caitlin?" She flinched, but her defiance flared again. "You don't understand. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, I said, my voice low but firm. You just made the wrong one. Now start talking. Who are these people you've been working with? What's their endgame? I don't know, she blurted out, her voice rising. I don't know, okay? They came to me months ago, said they knew about you, about your job. They said if I didn't cooperate, they'd ruin you, or worse. And you believed them? I demanded, taking a step closer. You trusted them over me? They showed me pictures, she said, her voice cracking. Pictures of you outside the field office, at those warehouses, meeting with people I didn't recognize. They knew things, Chris. Things I couldn't explain. What was I supposed to think? You were supposed to come to me, I said, my tone hard. Not to them. Not to him. Marcus, who had been silent up until now, finally spoke. She didn't have a choice, man. These people don't take no for an answer. I turned to him, my eyes narrowing. Oh, don't you worry, Marcus. We'll get to you in a minute. He shrank back in his chair, muttering something under his breath, but I ignored him. My focus was on Caitlin. You got yourself involved with dangerous people, Caitlin, I said, my voice cold but steady. And you dragged me into it without even realizing it. Do you have any idea what you've done? I was trying to protect you, she said softly, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know what else to do. For someone trying to protect me, you sure did a hell of a job putting a target on both our backs, I said bitterly. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. Caitlin looked like she was about to crumble, but I didn't let myself feel pity. Not yet. There was too much at stake. Now, I said, turning back to Marcus. It's your turn. Who are they? What do they want? He hesitated, his hands gripping the edges of the chair like it was the only thing keeping him upright. I don't know their names, he said finally. They don't tell us much. They keep everything compartmentalized. All I know is they're based out of Eastern Europe. They run smuggling operations, drugs, weapons, counterfeit goods. They use legitimate businesses, like my agency, to launder their money. And Caitlin? I asked, my voice like ice. What was her role? He swallowed hard. She helped move money. Small amounts, just enough to avoid suspicion. I didn't tell her everything, I swear. I just needed someone I could trust. I laughed bitterly. Trust? That's rich coming from you. Chris, please, Caitlin said, stepping toward me. I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know it was this big. You didn't know because you didn't ask, I said, my voice rising. You just went along with it, like it was some harmless favor. But this isn't just cheating, Caitlin. This is treason. This is conspiracy. Her face crumpled, and she covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling freely now. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Sorry isn't going to cut it, I said, my tone hard. Not this time. Marcus shifted again, and I turned to him, leveling him with a glare. Where do they operate? How do they communicate? They use burner phones, he said quickly, eager to cooperate now that he saw the writing on the wall. Anonymous emails. Everything's encrypted. They only contact me when they need something. I don't even know who half of them are. You better hope that's true, I said, stepping closer. Because if I find out you're holding anything back, you'll wish you'd never met me. I'm telling you everything I know, he insisted, his voice cracking. I swear. I stared at him for a long moment, my jaw tight, before finally stepping back. Good. Because you're going to help me take them down? What? Marcus's face paled. You heard me, I said. You're going to cooperate with the FBI, or you're going to spend the rest of your life rotting in a cell. Your choice. Marcus looked like he might pass out. His mouth opened and closed a few times before he managed to choke out a response. You can't be serious, he stammered. If I cooperate, they'll kill me. If you don't cooperate, you'll wish they had, I said coldly. The FBI doesn't take kindly to people who lie during an investigation. You think these smugglers are dangerous? Wait until you see what happens when the Bureau starts digging. Chris, please, Caitlin started, but I held up a hand to silence her. You don't get to defend him, I snapped. You don't get to defend any of this. Not after what you've done. She flinched, her hands trembling as she crossed her arms over her chest. For the first time since this nightmare began, she looked like she truly understood the gravity of the situation. I turned back to Marcus, narrowing my eyes. Here's how this is going to work. You're going to tell me everything you know, contacts, locations, communication methods, everything. And you're going to do it now. Don't lie to me, I barked, slamming my fist against the wall. The sound reverberated through the small apartment, and Marcus jumped, his eyes wide with fear. You think I'm bluffing? You think I won't drag you out of here in cuffs? Because I will. Marcus's hands shot up in surrender, his voice trembling as he spoke. Okay, I'll tell you what I know. Good, I said, pulling out my phone and hitting record. Start talking. He hesitated, glancing nervously at Caitlin, but one sharp look from me made him focus. They've got a warehouse on the east side of town, he said quickly. It's near the docks, disguised as a shipping company. That's where most of the cash gets moved. They use shipping containers to smuggle goods, drugs, weapons, counterfeit currency. I've delivered payments there a few times, but they don't let me inside. Everything's locked down. What about their communications? I pressed. How do they reach out to you? Burner phones, he repeated. They give me a new one every time. I've got the most recent one in my car. And the money? I asked. How do they funnel it through your agency? Marcus hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. I create fake invoices. Clients who don't exist. The payments go into the agency's account, then get transferred to offshore accounts. And Caitlin? I asked, my voice sharp. What was her part in all this? He glanced at her again, guilt etched on his face. She didn't know everything, he said softly. I gave her small amounts to transfer, told her it was for the agency. She didn't ask questions. Of course she didn't, I muttered, my stomach churning. I turned to Caitlin, my expression hard. You trusted him without a second thought. Meanwhile, you were digging into me. Do you see how insane that is? I didn't know, she protested, tears streaming down her face. I thought you were hiding something from me. Something dangerous. I said bluntly, because it was my job. But I wasn't betraying you. I wasn't lying to your face while you helped a smuggler funnel dirty money. Her face crumpled, and she sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered. I wanted to feel like I had control again. I stared at her, my chest tight with a mix of anger and sorrow. And now? Do you feel like you're in control? She didn't answer. I turned back to Marcus, my patience wearing thin. Where's the burner phone? In my car, he said quickly. It's in the glove compartment. Good, I said, ending the recording on my phone. You're coming with me. What? His face went pale. No, I can't. You don't have a choice, I said, grabbing his arm and pulling him to his feet. You're going to show me the phone, and then you're going to help me set a trap for your friends. Marcus reluctantly led me outside to his car, Caitlin following a few steps behind us. She looked like she wanted to say something, but I wasn't in the mood for another excuse. I opened the passenger door of Marcus's car and pulled the burner phone from the glove compartment. It was cheap and disposable, like the kind you'd pick up at a gas station. I flipped through the messages, scanning the most recent ones. There it was, a time and location for his next drop, warehouse, 10 p.m. tomorrow. I shoved the phone into my pocket and turned to him. You're going to call them and confirm that drop. Tell them everything's going according to plan. They'll know something's up if I don't show up alone, Marcus protested. Then you'd better hope you're convincing, I said coldly. Because if you screw this up, I'm not the one you'll have to worry about. Marcus hesitated, his hands trembling as he stared at me. He looked like a cornered animal, but I didn't care. He was running out of options, and he knew it. Call them, I ordered, tossing the phone onto the car's dashboard. Now. His gaze flickered to Caitlin, as if silently pleading for help. She didn't say anything, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. For once, she looked as lost as he did. I can't, Marcus stammered. If I mess this up, you're already in over your head, I said sharply, cutting him off. You're lucky I'm giving you a chance to cooperate. So stop wasting time and make the damn call. With shaky hands, Marcus picked up the burner phone. His fingers fumbled over the buttons as he dialed a number from memory. I stood close, listening carefully as the line connected. Yeah, it's me, Marcus said, his voice unsteady. He paused, swallowing hard. The drop's still on for tomorrow. Everything's in place. A gruff voice responded on the other end, too muffled for me to make out the words. Marcus nodded, though no one could see him. Yeah, no problems. I'll be there. Another pause. Marcus flinched at whatever the voice said, but he managed to keep his composure. Got it. See you then. He ended the call and set the phone down on the dashboard like it might explode. His chest rose and fell rapidly, sweat beading on his forehead. They're expecting me, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Good, I replied, pulling out my own phone. I dialed Richards, who picked up on the second ring. Mike? What's going on? I've got a location for the smuggler's next drop, I said, my tone clipped. Warehouse near the docks, tomorrow at 10 p.m. We need a team in place. Richards didn't hesitate. Understood. I'll mobilize the task force and coordinate with local law enforcement. Are you sure about this? Absolutely, I said. I'll send you the details as soon as I'm done here. Be careful, Mike, Richards said. These guys don't play around. Neither do I replied, ending the call. As I slipped the phone back into my pocket, I turned to Marcus. You did the right thing, for once. But don't think this lets you off the hook. You're coming with me tomorrow. What? His eyes widened in panic. No way. I can't. If they see me with you. You'll be under surveillance, I said, cutting him off. The team will have your back. But we need you to get us inside. I can't do this, he muttered, shaking his head. I'll be dead before it's over. If you don't do this, you'll be in prison for the rest of your life, I said coldly. Your choice. He didn't argue further, slumping against the side of his car in defeat. Caitlin stepped closer, her voice soft but trembling. Chris, what happens now? What happens now, I said, turning to her, is that I clean up your mess. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't let it sway me. Go home, Caitlin. Stay there. Don't call anyone. Don't do anything. If you so much as breathe in the wrong direction, this whole operation could fall apart. She nodded, her voice breaking. Okay. Okay, I repeated, stepping closer. But understand this, you're not off the hook. I'm doing this to protect us both, but when it's over, we're going to have a long conversation about what happens next. She didn't respond, just nodded again, her tears spilling silently down her cheeks. I turned back to Marcus. Get some rest, I told him. Tomorrow, you're going to make yourself useful. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Richards and I worked tirelessly, coordinating the task force and planning the raid. The warehouse was a large, nondescript building near the docks, surrounded by shipping containers and heavy machinery, perfect for hiding illegal activity in plain sight. By the time night fell, the team was in place. Tactical units had the perimeter locked down, snipers stationed on nearby rooftops. Surveillance vans monitored the area, their feed streaming directly to command. I stood in one of the vans, reviewing the final plan with Richards. Marcus will approach the warehouse as usual, I said, pointing to a map of the site. Once he's inside, we wait for him to signal that the key players are in position. Then we move in. You sure he won't crack under pressure? Richards asked, raising an eyebrow. He's terrified, I admitted. But he's more afraid of prison than he is of them. He'll hold it together. Let's hope so, Richards said grimly. At 9:45 p.m., Marcus arrived at the warehouse. He parked his car near the loading dock and stepped out, visibly nervous. A team member handed him a small microphone disguised as a button on his shirt, ensuring we could hear everything that happened inside. Remember, I said through his earpiece, you're just there to confirm the drop. Stick to the script and don't do anything stupid. I got it, Marcus muttered, his voice shaky. Just don't let them kill me. We've got you covered, I said. Now go. He walked toward the warehouse, disappearing through a side door. The team and I listened intently as voices crackled through the earpiece, tense and clipped. The smugglers were on edge, But Marcus managed to hold his own, sticking to the story we'd rehearsed. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, Marcus's voice came through the earpiece, soft and trembling. They're all here. I count 6 of them. Weapons on the table. Copy that, I said, signaling to the team. Move in. As soon as I gave the signal, the tactical units moved with precision. The darkened warehouse became alive with coordinated action. Shadows in black tactical gear approached silently from every angle, their weapons ready. Richards and I stayed in the surveillance van, watching the live feed from the body cams. Inside the warehouse, Marcus's shaky breathing crackled through the earpiece. They're starting to count the cash, he whispered. Are you coming or not? Hold your position, I replied firmly. We're moving in now. Through the monitors, I could see the smugglers clustered around a table piled with cash, weapons, and what looked like small, tightly wrapped packages, likely drugs. The leader stood out immediately. A tall, broad-shouldered man with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. He barked orders in a language I didn't recognize, his voice carrying over the hum of machinery in the background. Team Alpha, breach on my mark, I said into the comms. 3, 2, 1, go. The sound of the breach was deafening. The tactical units stormed in, flashbangs lighting up the warehouse like bursts of daylight. Shouts erupted as the smugglers scrambled to react, but they were outmatched. Within seconds, the team had them on the ground, hands behind their heads. I grabbed my vest and weapon, stepping out of the van. Richards glanced at me. You sure you want to go in? This is personal, I said, already moving toward the warehouse. Inside, the scene was controlled chaos. Tactical officers secured the smugglers one by one, zip-tying their hands and checking them for weapons. Marcus was against the wall, his hands up, shaking like a leaf. One of the officers gave me a nod, indicating he was clear. Where's the leader? I asked, scanning the room. He ran toward the back, an officer said. We've got a team sweeping the area. I moved toward the back of the warehouse, stepping over piles of contraband. The air reeked of sweat, oil, and something metallic. I spotted a narrow hallway and raised my weapon, moving cautiously. The faint sound of footsteps echoed ahead. FBI! I shouted, my voice firm. Come out with your hands up. No response. My heart pounded as I advanced, clearing each corner with precision. Then I saw him, the leader. He was crouched behind a stack of crates, a pistol in his hand. He didn't fire, just glared at me with cold, calculating eyes. Drop the weapon, I ordered, keeping my aim steady. He smirked, raising the gun slowly, but not to fire. Instead, he set it on the ground and raised his hands. You think this is over, he said, his accent thick. You're just scratching the surface. Yeah, well, I replied, stepping forward and kicking the gun out of reach. We'll deal with the rest of it when we get there. Turn around. He complied, allowing me to cuff him. As I led him back toward the main area, his smirk didn't fade. It was the kind of look that said he knew something I didn't. Back in the main room, Richards was overseeing the cleanup. Officers cataloged the contraband while others loaded the smugglers into transport vans. Marcus stood off to the side, pale but alive. Caitlin's involvement hadn't come up yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time before the investigation uncovered her connection. Richards approached me, nodding toward the leader. Who's this guy? The one in charge, I said. For now. Richards raised an eyebrow. For now. He thinks he's untouchable, I said, watching as the leader was loaded into a van. But that's the thing about smugglers. They always underestimate how deep we'll dig. Richards nodded, then hesitated. Mike, about Caitlin. I stiffened, my jaw tightening. What about her? Are you going to turn her in? He asked, his voice low. Because if you don't, someone else will. I exhaled slowly, the weight of the question pressing down on me. Caitlin had made her choices, but I wasn't ready to make mine. Not yet. That night, I drove home alone. The operation had been a success, but the victory felt hollow. The smugglers were in custody, their network dismantled, for now. But the fallout from Caitlin's betrayal was only beginning. When I walked through the front door, the house was quiet. Caitlin was sitting on the couch, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope. "Chris," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Is it over?" I dropped my keys on the counter and leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "The smugglers are in custody," I said flatly. "But this? Us? That's a different story." She nodded slowly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix this," I said, my voice hard. "You lied to me, Caitlin. You betrayed me. And for what? To protect me? Or yourself?" Her lip quivered, but she didn't respond. For once, she had no excuse, no defense. "I need time to think," I said finally, my voice softening just enough to convey the truth. "Time to decide if this is even worth saving." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she nodded. "Take as much time as you need." I didn't reply. Instead, I turned and walked up the stairs, leaving her sitting alone in the dark. For the first time in weeks, the house felt quiet, too quiet. But it was better than the chaos. Tomorrow, I'd deal with the fallout. But tonight, I needed to be alone. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the blinds, piercing the quiet stillness of the house. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee in hand, staring blankly out the window. Sleep had been elusive, my mind circling around the same questions I couldn't answer. Caitlin was still here, her presence hanging in the air like a weight I couldn't shake. The faint sound of footsteps broke the silence. I didn't turn around, but I knew it was her. She hovered in the doorway, hesitant, like she was afraid to step into the room. "Chris," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond immediately, taking a slow sip of my coffee instead. Finally, I turned to her, my expression unreadable. "Talk then." She stepped inside, wringing her hands nervously. "I know I messed up. I know there's nothing I can say to make this right, but I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you." I set my mug down, the sound of it against the table louder than I intended. "You didn't mean to hurt me?" I repeated, my voice calm but cutting. "You lied to me. You put both of us in danger. And for what? Because you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth?" "I thought I was protecting you," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "They came to me with pictures, threats. I panicked, Chris. I didn't know what else to do." "You could have told me," I said, my voice rising slightly. "You could have trusted me to handle it. But instead, you went behind my back and got tangled up with criminals." "I was scared," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They knew things, Chris. Things I couldn't explain. They said if I didn't cooperate, they'd ruin you. Or worse." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "And you didn't think to ask yourself why they were targeting me? What they really wanted?" "I didn't know how deep it went," she admitted, her tears spilling over now. "I didn't know about Marcus's smuggling ring or the money laundering. I swear, Chris, I didn't know." I studied her for a long moment, searching for any trace of the woman I thought I knew. Her tears seemed genuine, but so had her lies. I didn't know if I could trust her anymore. "So what do you expect me to do now?" I asked, my tone heavy. "Just forgive you? Pretend none of this happened?" She shook her head, her shoulders slumping. "I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know the truth." "The truth?" I scoffed. "The truth is, you made choices that put both of us at risk. And now, I have to deal with the fallout while you stand there acting like the victim." Her face crumpled, but I didn't let up. "Do you even realize what could have happened? If the Bureau had found out about your involvement before I stepped in, you'd be facing prison time right now. And don't think for a second that I didn't consider letting that happen." Her breath hitched, and she took a step back as if I'd struck her. "Chris, I don't know if I can do this anymore, Caitlin," I said, cutting her off. "I don't know if I can look at you and not see all the ways you betrayed me." The silence that followed was suffocating. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, while I stared at her, my chest tight with anger and disappointment. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. "What do you want me to do?" I stood up, grabbing my coffee mug and moving toward the sink. "I don't know yet, but right now I need space." She nodded, wiping her cheeks with trembling hands. "Okay. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the kitchen. A moment later, I heard the soft click of the front door as she left. I didn't know where she was going, and for once, I didn't care. The next few days passed in a blur. The investigation into the smuggling ring consumed most of my time, leaving little room to think about Caitlin or the mess she'd left behind. Richards and I worked tirelessly, piecing together evidence from the warehouse raid. The smugglers' network was more extensive than we'd initially thought, with ties to international crime syndicates. But despite the progress we were making, I couldn't shake the nagging sense of unease. The leader's words echoed in my mind, "You're just scratching the surface." He wasn't wrong. Every lead we followed seemed to branch off into a dozen more, each one more dangerous than the last. And through it all, Caitlin's betrayal lingered in the back of my mind, a wound that refused to heal. One evening, as I sat in the dim glow of my office, my phone buzzed. It was Richards. "Mike," he said, his tone serious. "We've got a problem." "What is it?" I asked, already bracing myself for bad news. "We traced one of the smugglers' offshore accounts," he said. "It's connected to a larger network operating out of Europe. And get this, they flagged your name." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I mean they know who you are," Richards said. "They know you're the one who took down their U.S. operation. And they're not happy about it." A cold chill ran down my spine. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The weight of Richards' words sank in like a lead weight. My name was flagged, and that meant one thing. Retaliation was inevitable. These people weren't the kind to let someone like me dismantle their operation without striking back. And if they had my name, they likely had more than that. "What's the scope?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. "How much do they know?" "We're still figuring that out," Richards replied. "But if they flagged you, they could have access to your personal information, home address, family, friends. You need to take precautions." "Precautions," I muttered, leaning back in my chair. My mind raced through the possibilities, each one worse than the last. This just keeps getting better. "It's not just you, Mike," Richards continued. "Caitlin's name came up too." I froze, the air leaving my lungs. "They know about her?" "They know she's connected to you," he said. "We don't have specifics, but if they're looking for leverage, she's an obvious target." "Damn it," I hissed, running a hand through my hair. "What's the plan?" "We've got eyes on your place and the usual protocols in place," Richards said. "But you need to bring Caitlin in. She's not safe out there, especially if she's on their radar." "She's not exactly my priority right now," I muttered, though I knew he was right. As much as I hated to admit it, Caitlin was still my responsibility, and if these people were gunning for her, I couldn't sit back and do nothing. "Mike," Richards said, his tone firm, "I get it. She screwed up. But if something happens to her, it's on you. Do what you need to do, but get her under protection." "Fine," I said, my jaw tightening. "I'll handle it." "Good," he said. "And Mike, watch your back." The call ended, leaving me in the heavy silence of my office. I stared at my phone for a long moment before dialing Caitlin's number. It rang twice before she picked up. "Chris," she answered, her voice hesitant. "We need to talk," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Where are you?" "I'm at my sister's place," she said softly. "Why?" "Because you're not safe," I said. "Pack your things. I'm coming to get you." "Not safe," she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "What's going on?" "I'll explain when I get there," I said. "Just do it." I hung up before she could argue, grabbing my keys and heading out the door. Every instinct in me wanted to leave her to deal with the consequences of her actions, but this wasn't just about her anymore. If the smugglers came after Caitlin, they wouldn't stop there. They'd use her to get to me, and I couldn't let that happen. When I arrived at her sister's house, Caitlin was waiting on the front porch with a small overnight bag. She looked tired, her face pale and drawn, as if she hadn't slept in days. Her sister lingered in the doorway, watching us with wary eyes. "What's going on?" Caitlin asked as I stepped out of the car. "We'll talk in the car," I said, glancing around the quiet suburban street. "Let's go." She hesitated, but the urgency in my tone must have convinced her. Without another word, she climbed into the passenger seat, and I pulled out of the driveway. For a while, we drove in silence. Caitlin stared out the window, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Finally, she spoke. "Chris, what's happening? Why aren't I safe?" "The people you got involved with," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "They know who I am. They know who you are. And if they decide to come after us, they won't hold back." Her breath hitched, and she turned to me, her eyes wide with fear. "You mean they could?" "Yes," I said, cutting her off. "That's why you're coming with me. I'm getting you somewhere safe." "Safe where?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What are we going to do?" "We're going to do what I should have done from the start," I said, my tone grim. "We're going to make them wish they'd never come after us." We arrived at a safe house on the outskirts of town, a nondescript, single-story building surrounded by woods. It was one of the Bureau's standard safe locations, equipped with security cameras and reinforced locks. As soon as we stepped inside, I locked the door behind us and activated the security system. Caitlin stood in the middle of the living room, looking lost. "How long are we going to stay here?" she asked. "As long as it takes," I replied, moving to the small desk in the corner where a laptop and phone were already set up. "Until we're sure they've been neutralized." "And what if they find us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to her, my expression hard. "Then they'll regret it." The first few days in the safe house passed in tense silence. Caitlin and I barely spoke, the weight of everything between us too heavy to ignore. I spent most of my time at the desk, coordinating with Richards and the task force. The smuggling network was vast, but we were making progress. One by one, their assets were being seized, their people arrested. But the threat wasn't over yet. The leader's words still haunted me. "You're just scratching the surface." One night, as I reviewed surveillance reports, Caitlin approached hesitantly. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed over her chest, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Chris," she said softly, "can we talk?" I didn't look up from the laptop. "About what?" "About us," she said, her voice trembling. "About what happens after this." I sighed, leaning back in the chair. "What happens after this depends on you." She blinked, caught off guard. "Me?" "Yes," I said, finally meeting her gaze. "Because right now, I don't trust you. I don't trust your judgment, and I don't know if I ever will again." Her face crumpled, but she didn't look away. "I know I messed up," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "I know I hurt you, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right." I stood up, crossing my arms. "Making this right starts with honesty, Caitlin. No more lies. No more half-truths. If there's anything you haven't told me, now's the time." She shook her head quickly. "I've told you everything. I swear." I studied her for a long moment, trying to gauge her sincerity. Finally, I nodded. "We'll see." The breakthrough came 3 days later. Richards called in the early hours of the morning, his voice tense but triumphant. "We got them," he said. "The top tier of the network. The leader you arrested gave us everything we needed to take down the operation in Europe. It's over, Mike." For the first time in weeks, I felt the tension in my chest ease. "Good work," I said. "What about the threats against me and Caitlin?" "We believe they've been neutralized," he said, "but I'd still keep an eye out. These kinds of people don't forget easily." "Understood," I said, ending the call. I turned to Caitlin, who had been sitting on the couch, watching me anxiously. "It's over," I said. "The operation is dismantled." She exhaled sharply, covering her face with her hands. "Thank God," she whispered. "Thank God." But I wasn't celebrating yet. "We're not out of the woods, Caitlin. These people don't let things go. They may come after us again." She nodded, her expression somber. "What do we do now?" I looked at her, my jaw tightening. "Now, we figure out where we stand." We left the safe house later that day, returning to a house that no longer felt like home. The silence between us was heavy as we unpacked what little we'd brought. Caitlin tried to speak a few times, but I wasn't ready to have the conversation she wanted. A week passed, then another. Slowly, the pieces of our life began to settle, but the cracks remained. Every time I looked at her, I saw the betrayal. Every time she looked at me, I saw the guilt in her eyes. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, she finally broke the silence. "Chris," she said, her voice trembling, "I know things will never be the same between us, but I want to try. I want to rebuild what we had." I set my fork down, staring at her. "And how do you expect me to do that, Caitlin? How do you expect me to forget what you did?" "I don't," she said quickly, tears streaming down her face. I just want a chance to prove to you that I'm still the woman you married." I leaned back in my chair, my expression unreadable. "I don't know if that's possible." "Please," she whispered, "just give me a chance." The room fell silent as I weighed her words. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave the wreckage behind and start over. But another part of me, the part that remembered the good times, the love we'd shared, wanted to believe there was still something worth saving. "I'll think about it," I said finally. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the only one I could give. She nodded, wiping her tears, and for the first time in weeks, there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. In the end, some things couldn't be fixed. The investigation moved on, but the scars it left behind didn't heal so easily. Caitlin and I tried to rebuild, but the cracks in our foundation were too deep. Trust, once broken, is almost impossible to mend. 6 months later, I filed for divorce. She didn't fight it. She didn't beg. She just nodded, tears in her eyes, and signed the papers. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the right thing. As I walked out of the lawyer's office that day, I felt a strange sense of relief. The weight I'd been carrying for months was finally gone. The chapter with Caitlin was over, but I was still standing. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Some wounds don't heal. Some betrayals can't be undone. But life goes on. And so did I.